Okay. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining me today for this video series called The Artisans of the Horizon. It's really nice to see you, and I always appreciate your time and your life and your work. And it's exciting to do this with you.
Well, thank you, Jerry. It's good to be with you, and I respect what you're doing, and what should I say? The struggles you're engaged in, the forces you're taking on, and the joyful spirit with which you do it.
Well, as you pointed out in your book, you know, joy is the human's noblest act. So I'm trying to be noble. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how good I am at it, but I'm trying, and that's what matters.
That's what matters the most.
Yeah. Well, this series is called The Artisans of the Horizon. The reason why is because, you know, when we look at something, we oftentimes see what we're looking at, but we don't realize that there's something more beyond what we're looking at. So if you're looking at a horizon, you only really see as far as your eye can see. And though reality tells us that there's more beyond what only our eye can see. So I'm using this kind of imagery as a way of framing the work that all these different types of change makers are doing: activists, artists, writers, thinkers, prophets, mystics, lovers, dreamers, because it's all related into planting ourselves into this present moment and trying to help people point beyond the horizon. And so I mean, there's no better person to have that conversation with than you, because you've been doing that for so long. And I want to get your insights and have, you know, a dialogue with you about that. So how does that sound?
Great. Let me just respond to your title there, because I like it a lot. First of all, I like the word artisan very much. It has art in it, obviously, but to me, it also has a practical in it. An artisan is one who gets something done, who can do something, right? Like it's a craft. So it's someone working with his hands or her hands. So to be artisan, even in the art of politics, is very important. So I just love that term that you've chosen. It's grounded, but it is about creativity. And we were talking about joy earlier, and joy and creativity go together. The Upanishads say, where there is creativity, there is joy. Where there is joy, there is creativity. And that's my experience too. For example, working with inner city teenagers like I did for several years, I had them making movies. And in that process, the joy of learning came to them, unlike school, although we were doing this as part of an after-school program. But the results were that 100% of them now wanted to stay in school. Why? Because they experienced the joy of learning. And then that word horizon I love, because it stretches you. And I love, there's a line from Otto Rank, one of my favorite thinkers and my very favorite psychologist. And he says that everyone seeks a beyond. Everyone seeks a beyond. As part of being human is to quest for the beyond. So I think you brought together some wonderful language there just in the title of your program, Artisans of the Horizon, creators of the beyond, you might say. Or anyway, it's an invitation that the soul of the human person seeks the beyond, but our hands and our bodies, our feet, have to get involved in the artisan work and creative work and ground our creativity in something that matters. You know, not just creativity to get famous or be on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
But to, you know, to make a difference about what matters. So anyway, I just to commend you for that phrase. I like it, and it's fresh. It's yours. It's original.
Well, thank you. I went back and forth on it, trying to figure out what really could, because I had this image, as I explained, and I couldn't really figure out the best way to put it together. And I didn't want to call it, you know, like I didn't want to use a word like change agents or something like that, because I feel like that's language that everybody hears all the time, and it's used so much it doesn't really have a meaning anymore. And whereas art, an artisan always provokes and invokes this imagery, this energy, this vitality of freshness, of newness, and it's always inspiring. It pushes us forward by going deeper. And so, yeah, I like the interplay between the two.
And I'll even say this about your title there, that it's also, I would call it pre-modern. And for me, that's a big compliment. I'm not impressed by modern consciousness or or should I say, the problems that's left on our doorstep, like the eco-crisis and dead religion and pseudo-religion and pseudo-education and all the rest. So this is one reason I keep being drawn back to the Middle Ages for inspiration. And in the Middle Ages, in pre-modern thinking, and that's also indigenous thinking. I'm also very drawn to indigenous wisdom. The word art is not about fine art, whatever that means. It's about artisanship. So the word art is used across the board. Aquinas talks about the art of horse riding and taking care of the horses, the art of building ships, in other words, what we call the art of engineering. And you know, that everything is an art. And that's, of course, how indigenous people see the world. Many indigenous languages do not have the word art in it because it's taken for granted. We're all artisans. We all grow our food and make our clothes and all that. Obviously, that's shifted, but within the human soul is this passion for creativity and for making things new. And so again, I think you've chosen a very useful, practical but telling word there, and I give you credit for that. That itself is artisanship, the choosing of language and the rejecting of old, tired language that, as you just said, has lost its meaning and its energy and its power because it's overused.
And you know, when I was, because I contacted a couple of people asking them to give me some feedback on it, and one of the things that I was going back and forth on is whether or not to include the word new, artisans of the new horizon, or if I should leave it out and just put artisans of the horizon. And I ultimately chose to leave it out because I feel like that paradigm is always promoted. We either are creating something brand new that's unique to only us, which isolates us and takes us out of the context of history and space, or we're post something. We're post, you know, religion, or we're post that, which I've never really been a fan of that construct because I feel like it dismisses the reality. Both of those two things dismiss the context of what we are now, and I feel like a mystic or a prophet is always somebody who's grounded in the present moment, because you can only give birth to the new reality or to the future by being in the present moment. And so that's why I did not include that word.
I'm glad you didn't. And for one of the reasons you just gave especially, and that is that our ancestors, wisdom is not wonderful because it's new. It's wonderful because it's wisdom. And a lot of wisdom, as opposed to knowledge, is not new. It seems new, it appears fresh because the current history may be, as you said earlier, very boring and lost its juice. But again, I think by not using the word new, you're respecting that wisdom of our ancestors is worth recovering and integrating into the now, as you say. And it's wonderful to be fully present in the now and then to come out of that state and realize, oh, these wisdom figures from the past, they also experienced identical experiences. So this is not brand new. And that being new is not what makes something good. Something shiny is not necessarily something enduring or endearing, you know. Quite the opposite.
and productivity does not equal creativity. The production of something new, the production of something more shiny, more extravagant, more big, and it takes up more space, doesn't mean that it's better or greater than something else. And I think that's where our technology has failed, because as amazing as technology is, I mean, right before we started this, I was having some tech issues. It has these bugs, these glitches, and certainly there is some truth to be said that there's some wisdom that you can learn in the glitches. There's some truth that you can learn in the buffering of technology, the buffering of your life. But I think artisans help to reframe that, but like as you said, the fact that Indigenous don't have a word for art because everybody's an artist. It's the understanding that all of it has to be art because all of it is a process. It's not a product. It's not about creating an end. It's about going through the flow of it. In fact, in one of your books, in your Creation Spirituality book, there's a quote in here I wanted to read. It says, where is it? Our civilization has reduced awe to the next anthropocentric invention, resulting in the estrangement of individuals, of the artist, of the mystic. In isolation, we turn to the idolatry of of consumerism, wherein buying replaces making. The recovery of the creation tradition encourages a great mystical awakening in our time. And I think that's true. Yeah, we've replaced awe and wonder and creativity with dazzlements and excitement,
shock and awe.
Shock and awe, yeah. Overstimulation.
Yes, overstimulation, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And of course, implications of that are that we have to be continually overstimulated. So we're in a squirrel cage of never ending, of avaricious seeking of more and more highs, which I think explains a lot of the drug addictions and frankly other addictions, and they can be even work addictions or Wall Street capitalist money grabbing addictions or sex addictions or any addictions. I think that our culture is uniquely set up to feed us addictions. I think that's one of its greatest accomplishments. If by great you mean most prevalent, not great in terms of spiritual benefit, quite the opposite, exactly the opposite, in fact. And that's why I think, we're in the kind of trouble we're in. It's why we've ignored nature for centuries, and then all of a sudden we're beginning to see, the air is unhealthy. The world's on fire. A whole continent was on fire last summer.
Yeah.
And what difference did that make? Now we have coronavirus, which is part of climate change too. That we become, we've disallowed the habitats for other animals and species, and so more and more they're interacting with us, and we're going to get bitten, literally. I mean, the HIV began from a monkey in Africa, and now we have a bat in China spreading that. And of course, HIV killed 38 million human beings around the world. We can forget that. I mean, we can forget that pandemic of AIDS and HIV that was so destructive. And now we're in this other one. And, are we learning any lessons? And the lessons are spiritual lessons. They are about allowing others their space. That includes other beings. They have a right to be here too. And if we just deprive them of their habitats and their rights, then we are going to pay the price. And Hildegard of Bingen said that in the 12th century, that we're part of this web of creation. And if we humans, she said, unjustly take over the web, God will allow creation to punish humanity, is how she put it. And I think it's really interesting. She doesn't say God is coming after us, putting us in hell, but that creation is going to create a hell for our species. And it seems to me there's a lot of that going on today, and it's not diminishing. It's going to get worse with your generation because you've inherited the sins of the fathers and mothers before you who've been so negligent. The whole modern era of religion, I think, and education has been a disaster. You know, Thomas Berry used to say the greatest failures of the 20th century, he said, were religion and education. I think that's really a sobering sentence from a very, very wise man. And my whole life has been in both. A masochist or what, but I've chosen to try to revolutionize both or reform both. And I've got my wounds to show for it. But at least I've been in the right battle, I think. I'll say that much. By the way, I want to tell you that something kind of personal hit me 2 nights ago in bed. And that is that this is the 50th anniversary of my graduating from the Institut Catholique in Paris 50 years ago in May. And I thought, well, that's kind of neat. I didn't celebrate my 50th anniversary as a priest, but I think it's worth I was thinking, yeah, it's worth remembering this because I owe so much to my mentors in Paris and what I learned there and all the trouble I've gotten in since. I think I want to give a shout out to this particular moment in my personal history. I'm glad I'm being interviewed by a smart young activist at this moment.
Well, you know, it's cool because my spiritual director is celebrating his 50th anniversary of being a priest too.
Now again, this isn't the 50th anniversary of my being a priest. This 50th anniversary of my graduating from the Catholic.
Yeah.
I didn't. 5 years ago was my 50th, but I didn't celebrate it. It just didn't come up.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool, and I'm glad that you're here. You're doing this with me. I think it's fun and something that I really appreciate too about working with you and getting to know you and dialoguing with you is I've been blessed to be able to know lots of different types of people who are doing all different types of work. But you have been the only one that has regularly been actively interested in the things that I was doing or trying to do or investing in the ethos that I'm trying to form. So I really appreciate that because there's not a lot of elders present in the world, and the people who claim to be elders oftentimes just assume that title because they have gray hair. And they often don't have the wisdom to back up being an elder. And so oftentimes those individuals, while they might have good intentions, end up taking a lot of oxygen from people. And so I appreciate that you don't embody that type of eldership.
Well, thank you. And it works both ways. I really appreciate young people who are stepping up in their prophetic roles. And, we need so much of that today. And, the wisdom comes from the old is only part of the story. Wisdom also comes from the young. And especially when in an era, in a moment of time in history, when epic is changing, and we have different words for that today, modern to postmodern or age of Aquarius from the age of Pisces, whatever name you want to give it. It's especially at these cultural shifts that young people are, I think, inspired, literally. The Holy Spirit seeks them out, calls them, that there are vocations that young people have. And it takes generosity and it takes trust, which is really what faith means, to step up and pay the price. And you're doing that. And the simple lifestyle that you've chosen is part of it. And there are others I've been blessed to know. Adam Bucko is one, and this young man I just did a video with the other day is very interesting. He's got his view on how the world needs to change, and he's 27. And anyway, I just think that, and then I think the people I started the Order of the Sacred Earth with, Skylar Wilson and Jen Listig, and there are a lot of young people who are being called, and it's so important that older people encourage them and give them what help they can, and exposure and the rest. I know I felt it when I was in my late 20s. I felt that things had to change, and I found very few older people who would kind of step up with me. One or two did, in addition to my mentor and my teachers in Paris. I'm celebrating this month. But it's a beautiful thing, but this what I call intergenerational wisdom, that we need to work together because our species is in such trouble in all its institutions that we need wisdom from the young and from the old and from everything in between, and from the more than human as well. The other critters have so much to teach us.
Yeah. And, I also think that it's one of the great gifts that elders can bring into this conversation of change making, of being artisans, is an ability to help keep us connected to a lineage of wisdom, a lineage of love, of grace. They don't think that young folks have the capacity to tap into. That's a beautiful expression of the great cloud of witnesses that is talked about in Hebrews. But also, I think elders have the grace and the gift of knowing that in the end, things morph, things transition. You've lived long enough that you've been able to see things move from one place to another, and also you've seen things stay the same. But you know that there's something beyond the horizon because you've been over several horizons. And I think that's a great gift because sometimes when you're so contextualized, you can't look beyond the wall. So I really appreciate that. And
well, I like how you put that, and I love that word lineage. And Robert Bly used to say that the primary work of the elder is to tell the stories. And James Hartman, his buddy, Hillman, the Jungian therapist, used to say that too, telling the stories. And that's really the lineage, And a lot of my work has been that. I've been, of course, thanks to my mentor, Per Chanu. He was 75 when I was in class with him, but who named this the two traditions, fall redemption and creation spirituality. That itself is just a shock of awakening to lineage, because it names so much for me. Oh yeah, there's this one cocoon we've been in as a religion for centuries that's all about sin and redemption and fall redemption. But then there's this other thing that's so much bigger, and it includes my deeper experiences of God and nature and of other traditions that also speak to the sacredness of nature, and certainly the indigenous traditions. And it is also found in the Bible, but has been roundly ignored in the Bible until recently. For example, finding that the historical Jesus comes from the wisdom tradition of Israel. That's saying he's creation-centered. That he was part of, because that's what the wisdom tradition is, finding wisdom in nature, not just in the written book. So, and then my life's work, finding this anew in Aquinas, and of course it's out front in Francis, but he didn't write that much. And Eckhart and Julian and Hildegard, all this lineage we have that's been totally either under-taught, under-known, or even mistranslated. This has happened recently in my lifetime. They mistranslated Eckhart, they mistranslated Julian because they projected dualism onto them that were not in their writings. And it's just shocking, really, how how anti-intellectual. See, my life as a Christian and a Catholic, I mean, I came of age during the Vatican Council. And then I landed in Paris right after it, and Chanou, who named this church for me, he was a real important figure at the Vatican Council. So this was all about the renewal of the Roman Catholic lineage. But then, and then what came out of it was liberation theology. Gutierrez, the first book on liberation theology, he had studied in Paris just before me. And that's what came out of it. And then, of course, it all got bombed in 34 years of bad popes, two bad popes, 34 years. That's 2 generations of people. And then you have the mess we're in now. You know, I was just thinking the other day, the comparison between the Roman Catholic Church in my lifetime and the American democracy in my lifetime. Because both of them have gone utterly downhill from great aspirations that one had with Jack Kennedy, if you will, and with the, you know, the movements of the 60s, including, of course, civil rights, and the war on poverty and all those good things. And then it was all co-opted and destroyed. And this darkness came out of it, including Watergate and everything else. But really, it's been some lifetime to see these two great entities, the Catholic Church on the one hand, and larger Christian church too, and American democracy, both go from, you know, some pretty high places to as low, it seems, as you can get. Yeah. It's really amazing, but it also, for me, and I wrote about this in my book, The Pope's War, but I went in some detail in what really happened in those 2 papacies. I came to the conclusion, it was by no means an intended conclusion. It grew out of the book. The Holy Spirit was trying to kill the Catholic Church. That's what it's kind of been doing. Yes, yeah. And it is succeeding. And in order to start this thing over, because it's wandered so far from Jesus' teachings, and it's not just the Roman Catholic Church, it's all the churches, I think, have failed us at this time in history. And I think maybe the same things happen to the Holy Spirit and American democracy. That it has to die, as Jesus said, before it can be born. And I think we're living through those hard times. That's one way I interpret this. And again, it's not just about America or Christianity. I think it's our species that is going through this, what I just called this morning, the double dark night of the soul. You know, scientists talk about the double darkness of matter. And I think we're going through a double dark night of the soul, of our species at this time. So it's either a wake-up call and a revelation, an awakening, or it is apocalypse. It is the end of our I think, our journey as a species. I think that's the kind of questions your generation is facing.
And I do think that that word, even that word apocalypse, I have been seeing more and more people using it. And I appreciate that people are not shying away from that word and are really unpacking it now and trying to reclaim it and say, no, a time of apocalypse is a good thing because it's a time of revealing, of exposing. Because if we don't expose it, if we don't reveal it, the wound won't get better. You know, sometimes they tell you in wound care, they tell you that after you bandage something up, you want to sometimes take the bandage off and let it air out a little bit so that the air can help with the healing process. Well, you know, if you keep it bandaged up all the time, you're not going to get everything that it needs for its healing. So if we don't reveal these things, if we don't reveal the immense pedophilia in all of our churches, we won't be able to heal those wounds. If we don't talk about the inherent patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia and transphobia, we will never heal, and we will just fall off the cliff together. And,
well said. And of course, that Greek word apocalypse can be translated revelation, and that's why you have translations of the Bible, the book of Revelations, the book of Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
So as you say, the revelation is of the shadow stuff, but it also, I think, is of our potential as a species. I mean, for me, that's an invitation. What's going on today, a great crisis, is invitation to move to another level of our evolution as a species and to take more to our hearts and actions and hands, our artisanship, the real teachings, whether of Jesus or Buddha or Isaiah or Muhammad or others, about our capacity for compassion, which is a divine capacity, including a capacity to forgive, which is really hard to do, but also a capacity to create and to make new. And so I think I love that line from Howard Thurman, because and he uses it often. He really loved it. He talks about our being stripped to the literal substance of ourselves before God, stripped to the literal substance of ourselves before God. I think that happens in a time of pandemic and in a time of climate crisis and in a time when all our institutions are failing us. They were failing us before the coronavirus. Now, as you say, it's just more apparent that the veil is off. The revelation is there. So where do we go? Do we just, go into our holes and hide or grab for our piece of the pie? Or do we reinvent the human species and make it more friendly to one another and to the other species with whom we share this planet and with whom we will either die or resurrect? We can't do it without them. We can't do it without rainforests. We can't do it without clean water and healthy oceans and good soil and healthy trees and all the rest. I think that's the kind of a turning point we're at today. And it's an amazing time to be alive. And it's amazing, I think, for your generation to be here and saying, what's this and what's my role in it? And what a moment for a leap forward for our species. And I always think religion has to be stripped down. It's just accrued so much stuff. It has to get back to the essence. And I think you get back to the essence of Jesus and the prophets. It's about justice and it's about compassion. And they go together. Compassion is not about a sissy justice. And compassion and justice are really the same words in Hebrew. And as Eckhart said, compassion means justice. So there's a strength and a fierceness to what we have to do to reinvent our forms of economics and education and religion and politics and media and art. All this is failing us. What an opportunity. What a great time to be alive. It matters, the decisions we make.
Yeah, and it's exciting. And I think that's a great attitude to go into it with, because otherwise, we'll lose. I mean, if we don't go into this with a sense of joy, a sense of excitement, a sense of knowing that adventure, knowing at the end that the story will always, this is what I have been saying since this whole pandemic started. I've been telling people, no matter what, the story will always end in glory. There's just no way, because the universe is designed to be glorious. I forget who said it. I think it was Aquinas who said that the cosmos testified to the glory of God. He
said it too. The whole earth speaks the glory of God.
Yeah.
But that's well said, what you say there about the glory is there.
Yeah.
And theologically speaking, glory, doxa, is the code word for the cosmic Christ.
Yeah.
Or if you prefer Buddha nature, but it is that radiance of the divine that is found in all creation as a whole and in each individual being. It is that image, that reflection of divinity. So what you're saying, I think, is very real. But of course, we have a right to ask. Maybe humanity won't destroy itself or come real close to it. But Earth and creation will go on, as you say. The glory will go on.
Yeah.
And maybe there'll be another planet or another version of humanity that will be deserving of the glory that it's been given. But I love that word adventure or excitement that you're using, because Whitehead, the British scientist, philosopher, used to say that when religion loses its sense of adventure, it's dead. And I think a lot of religion has lost that adventure side. But now, as you just said, it's back insofar as, our existence today is an adventure. There are real decisions we're going to make as a species. And so, all hands on deck, man. This is a moment of adventure. And, I think your word beyond, or the word horizon, captures some of that too. There's something about a horizon that calls one, a horizon, whatever horizon is bigger than us. It's mystery. And so that's like an adventure, I think even of Columbus, for all his negative side, nevertheless, he had the courage to set out on this adventure, seeking the horizon, going over the horizon literally, because they didn't know what was on the other side of the ocean. In fact, they were utterly mistaken. As many Native people have told me, he didn't discover America, he got lost. When he got to America, he thought he was in India, which is where they came up with the word Indians. But he didn't discover America, he got lost. But the point is, at least he was going over the horizon. He was setting out for the horizon, and he totally messed up. So we want to keep that in mind too, as we extol the adventure of horizon seeking, horizon sailing.
One of the things too about adventure is adventure necessitates lightness, a kind of simplicity. And I think in regards to religion and theology and spirituality, we have to kind of take that virtue of lightness and kind of lighten things up a little bit, lessen our negative impact. And as I remember once you did an interview for something for Creation Spirituality Communities. And you were talking about your life and your work, and you alluded to this analogy of we need to move from a cathedral faith where everything happens in this big cathedral and we spend all this money on these giant buildings, and move to a faith that's more contained in a backpack that we can throw over our shoulder. And I really like that idea. And it provokes in my mind the question of, well, what do we put in our backpack? What is our faith backpack going to contain? Does it contain the pictures of our loved ones? Does it contain some prayer beads, a prayer book? Does it contain letters from elders from the past? Does it contain an extra pair of shoes? Because you might run into a fellow pilgrim who might need new shoes. And then that relates to me also in the level of the Catholic worker movement, because our movement was started upon the works of mercy, doing the practical thing. In the personalism philosophy of the Catholic worker, we teach each other that if you see a problem, you go and address it. You don't wait for the church to do it. You don't wait for your community to do it. You address it and invite people to join in with it. And so it's about taking personal responsibility. And so I think that idea is a good one to apply to faith and about religion and theology.
Well, I agree, and I think that's part of Dorothy Day's spiritual genius, and Peter Marin, who, as you know, was her founding buddy. And it's so grassroots, you see, and in that way it's very anti-hierarchical, but in a subtle way. It's not saying hierarchy has no place or forget them, but it's saying we're responsible. We sort out what the problems are, and we fine-tune our noses for injustice and our smell for injustice, and we try to do something about it. And I just say gather allies. And this whole image I used about, I talk about it as we have to journey today, not with basilicas on our back, but backpacks on our back. I love the question you're asking. What should we put in the backpack? Because that's the next question. And I like what you're talking about. It's interesting. More and more people I know are walking the Camino Real these days when they can. That there's this return to pilgrimage today.
Yeah.
And this is not just Christians. I have a good Buddhist friend who's done it twice, and now he's talking about it doing it a third time. This whole idea, that being close to the earth and making a sacrifice, but you don't look on it as a sacrifice, but it is. It's not a pleasant thing. I mean, you could be home in your couch watching TV.
Yeah.
But no, you choose to hike for 400 miles and meet strangers and stay in strange places and deal with the weather and everything else. I mean, the whole idea of pilgrimage, I think, is returning as a powerful way for people who are overly comfortable to recover the sense of spiritual practice. But I know in my backpack that when I use that term, spiritual backpack, I certainly mean what we've been talking about, the ancestors. I would want to have Hildegard and Aquinas and Eckhart and as well as Jesus and Buddha and others in my backpack. Some of them I know so well I wouldn't have to put them in there, you might say. I've often said if I was alone on an island, the two theologians I'd want with me, that is to say their books, would be Howard Thurman and Rabbi Heschel. So I think they both have so much to say to us today. And then people say, well, what about Eckhart? What about Hildegard? Well, they're inside me already. They're with me wherever I go. I don't need backpack. I've been living with them for so long, they're in my brain.
Yeah.
So, you want to keep your backpack light. See, it's not just what's in there, it's what isn't in there,
Yeah.
What to leave out. But I love your question. And I think that'd be a fun question to pursue and ask groups of people. What would you put in your backpack? Because frankly, it's not, this is not just speculative. No, I mean, as the churches die all around us, a year ago, the Diocese of Manhattan, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Manhattan, spent the entire year shutting down 100 parishes. I mean, that's a big deal, shutting down 100 parishes, and they were just getting started. So, I mean, your generation, as you know, is not pounding their way to the churches. And yet there's a treasure there, as I've said for forever, that needs mining, that deserves mining. We need to take it with us. I call it taking the treasure from the burning building. But it's not just the Roman Catholic Church. All the mainline churches are shrinking. But I think a lot of it is this very theme we're talking about, that we have to substitute our version of religion as buildings and structures and all the rest. We have to substitute for that spirituality, which is traveling with backpack with a few things in mind, like Dorothy Day made clear, that justice matters, that allies matter, that sorting out the presence of injustice and blowing the horn really matters, and standing up to those forces that are perpetuating injustice. That's what matters. So it's about mysticism and practice. For that, you don't need big buildings. And it's interesting, during this coronavirus, so many churches shut down. It's going to be interesting what happens afterwards, because people are kind of fasting from going to church.
Yeah.
And they may find, oh, well, maybe there's something else that will give us that sense of community and could be a little more irregular than Sunday worship has been. I don't know, but it's going to be kind of interesting to monitor that. Because frankly, what is the future of worship if we have to be 6 feet away from each other? It's weird. It's going to be weird. And again, calling on our creativity in a big way.
And, also calling upon our capacity to trust that God is not going to be angry with us if we don't go to a building on Sunday morning. That frankly, God doesn't care where we go as long as we spend time with God. Whether that's in
the idea
that,
where did that come from? That the idea that God would be mad at us. I mean, back up to, whoa, that's a little disturbing. Aquinas says prayer does not change God. God doesn't need changing. Prayer
Yeah.
changes humans, and that's the need. And of course, we have need for community, and we have need. I mean, part of worship is bringing in the ancestors and the memory, the use of memory of me, and all that. But there, as you say, there are many ways to remember the presence of the divine in history, in our ancestors, and of course, especially in nature. And of course, we've been ignoring that. So
Yeah.
maybe this is an invitation to return to nature more often on the Sabbath, and the way Jesus did. You know, many scholars believe that he was considered illegitimate in his village, so he wasn't allowed in the synagogue on the Sabbath. So when everyone else went to the synagogue to pray, he went out in nature to pray.
Yeah.
And that's wisdom theology anyway. And it certainly shows in his teachings and his parables. They're just riddled with his experiences in nature. So maybe that's part of what's going on here from a religious perspective in the coronavirus. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. Make us more creation conscious.
Well, I think
Greener.
it's definitely a reality that we have to realize that the sacred is beyond four walls. The sacred's beyond our constructed theologies, and that God will always invade every space, and God is always inviting. You know, that's the number one thing that Jesus always embodied. Was Jesus always said, "Come, see, come experience, come play with us." You know, as you point out in your book on Aquinas, the Tao of Thomas Aquinas, you know, Aquinas taught that playfulness and fun are virtues, and you know, Aquinas taught virtue ethics, that we become more full human beings when we practice virtue. And I think that's one of the things certainly that we have to practice more and more in our life is playfulness, fun, lightheartedness, and invitation, inviting ourselves and each other and our world into more deeper and more real and more healing ways of being and thinking and praying and loving and creating. So it's it's an invitation. It's a blessing, you know. That's one of my favorite things about the Dominican order. You know, one of their mottos is to pray, to bless, to preach. I always thought that was really cool to have those three together, interrelated with each other. To praise, meaning to praise as in to put into a proper positive perspective, the positive way, the via positiva, but also to bless, to speak well. You know, the scripture says that we have power of life and death in our tongue. So if we learn to inhabit this art of blessing, we learn to speak well, to speak good things upon each other and upon the planet. Then that ultimately provokes us to want to engage life, and that's our preaching. Or, as you say in your first book, you know, prayer is a radical response to life. That's ultimately the whole point, is we need to respond to life. We need to engage with it, like a dance, a spiral dance.
Well, I agree. I like your invocation of Aquinas and all there. Definitely. And he says praise is the exaltation of joy. So we're back to our very first discussion on joy. You praise when joy fills your heart. And in learning to praise, what can I say? When the times aren't comfortable, is an art, and it's very important. And every prophet knows this, that real prophecy is not just about saying no and denouncing and pointing out the darkness and the injustice. It is also about offering an alternative, and it's also about demonstrating, about witnessing to joy as the alternative. And that's a deep part of praise, which is, as you say, what the Via Positiva is all about. And so the Transformativa work, it's fed by praise, it's fed by the Via Positiva, but then it returns to the Via Positiva, because justice is not an end in itself. It is about making it possible for more people to praise, to experience the joy and the gift and the grace that life is. And and to, like stones in the water, you know, to carry that to other circles of people. So yeah, I like the way you bring that together, and it's really a test of our spiritual maturity,
Yeah.
that we can still praise and still find goodness in the midst of a darkness. And that's what the dark night of the soul is all about, as the mystics put it.
Yeah.
That yes, their darkness comes, and sometimes, as Mechtel says, even the memory of the light of the lantern goes out.
Yeah.
But there is that trust, and there is that capacity to remember joy, and because we've tasted it deeply, and know that this is what life is all about. And that's why Aquinas says, sure joy is God's, mystery man's companionship, that the universe is just because of God's joy. And we're meant to be part of that, and we carry that joy with us even when times are rough. And the universe is rough, you know, it's not a sweet event. The fireball was 750,000 years of fire. We wouldn't have wanted to be there, but it birthed everything that's so amazing and beautiful, and is still birthing. So, you know, terror and beauty go together, as Rilke says. Terror and beauty go together. And I think that's part of really the archetype of the cross, too. There's terror in the cross, taking on an empire. You better expect it's not going to be a comfortable ending. But so that's part of the terror. But the beauty of daring to take on one version of politics, that is empire, versus a new one of the kingdom and queendom of God that's present, you know, that's worth the fight. And you got to keep the joy alive while you're carrying on the battle. And as you said, dimensions of fun and play and our humanity, therefore, you know, it really does come down a lot of this discussion to what is a human being. And that's what I think at apocalyptic time rattles out of us. What does it mean to be human? And we can look to our great wisdom teachers of the world to help us answer this. But ultimately, we all have to answer that before we die, and hopefully long before we die. Before we live, we have to answer it. You know, what does it mean to be human? And am I on board? And what do I have to give to the project?
Yeah, that's cool. And I like that question. What do I have to give to the project? I think that's super cool. Well, we're coming into our time, coming to the end of our time, and it's been fun and exciting and energizing, and I'm happy that you were able to join me for this. And what do you think, maybe in closing, can you give a word to the people who are going to watch this or listen to this later about what do you think is one or two things that you have learned in your life that have kept you going, that you can give to us who are listening as insight into the long haul, doing this for the long haul?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. It was fun and unrehearsed. And I would say, I kind of like that phrase. I just wrote it down after you said you liked the two that just came out of me. What do I have to give of being human? So that's what a good conversation does. It brings new language and new thoughts to one another. So I always say, creativity is not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 3. That it's a Trinitarian thing when two people get together and share their wisdom and hearts and minds, and a third thing comes out of it. So I learned today listening to you and talking with you, and I appreciate that very much. And I hope your listeners get something from it too. Well, I'll tell you one thing, and especially in a time of pandemic, I keep going back to Julian of Norwich, who of course lived through an entire century. Well, her whole lifetime was pandemic. She was 7 years old when the Black Death hit. And then it came back in waves her entire lifetime into the 15th century. And you know, the Black Death, some scholars say now it killed 1 out of 2 people in Europe. It certainly killed 1 out of 3. I mean, it was appalling in every way. And you were, when you got it, you were dead within 4 days. And it was terribly ugly. It was like AIDS, only on steroids, because your whole body turned to pus and all this, and you were dead within 3 or 4 days. So it was an absolute death sentence. But to think that she lived through that, and she created a whole theology around goodness. Her whole theology is about goodness. She says all of nature is good, and that all of nature is grace, and that goodness is God. She took Eckhart's phrase, isness is God, and she converts that to goodness is God. So I think what she's telling us is you got to keep goodness alive. And of course, my word for goodness is original blessing. Now, one thing that I've been struck by in going back to Aquinas is how often he uses the term original goodness. He uses it frequently. So here I, a Dominican, used the term original blessing, got literally expelled from the order for doing so. And although it was all politics, of course. But my point is that this is part of our lineage. And then I found that in Hildegard, she used the term original wisdom. They were born in original wisdom. So this whole idea of realizing our origins, as Julian says, God never began to love us. That the whole universe is born of love, or Aquinas says of joy. And that's the universe we've been invited into. And it is the universe of goodness. It doesn't mean there's not suffering and there's not pain and there's not mistakes, but that enveloping it all is well, as Hildegard says, we are embraced by the arms of the mystery of God. So I think keeping goodness alive in a time of darkness is primary. And I think, I don't care which term one uses, original goodness, I guess we'll bring less of the Vatican down upon one. I mean, the former Vatican. The present Pope, I don't think has any trouble with my theology at all. In fact, I think he's plagiarizing it, which is fine. But original blessing, I think, says a lot because it addresses that the original sin in Western Christianity is original sin from Augustine. That's the original sin. That's where the empire ran away with the church. They hijacked the church. They had a shotgun wedding in the 4th century, the Church and the Empire, and built around original sin. And now we're going to go out and get those savages and those Africans and put them in slave ships, and we have a right to do that. That's what the Pope said at the time in the Discovery document, because they don't know what we know about Jesus or something. I don't know what it was. But the point is that this marriage of empire and redemption has been, of course, a disaster for peoples all over the world and religions and cultures. And let me point this out in this pandemic we're in. Now maybe it puts some meat on the bones when we hear, because now it's not just words, that 90% of indigenous people in the Americas were wiped out when the Europeans came, the Christians came. Most of it from pandemic. Most of it from viruses. Now we're getting a flavor for that. Imagine what these native people went through when they got cholera and we got these viruses that the Europeans gave, and of course had no defense against it. That it's not just that they were wiped out, but that nature itself seemed to be turning on people. And that's, Thomas Berry says that the 14th century, the Black Death, is when Christian spirituality kind of died in the West, because, and then what did you have after that? Well, you had Thomas à Kempis and this privatized spirituality, and then of course you had a Protestant Reformation and all this emphasis on doom and gloom and hell and redemption, and it's been down that road in so many ways since. So that really the part of this, that's one reason I want to say at this time we want to cling to the teaching of original goodness and the goodness of nature, because it was not, it was a lack of science that made religion go bad for so many centuries. But today, science can help fight the virus, but we also need morality and spirituality to do the same.
Mm. That's cool. Well, I appreciate your time and your presence and your patience and your wisdom. And why don't we end with a, I was going to say, why don't we end with a quote? But actually, why don't we end with a blessing? Would you like to do a blessing for us?
Well, I know you like to sing. Why don't you sing as offer us a blessing?
Okay.
Musical blessing.
Let me think of something. Oh gosh. Well, there's the UU song, the Unitarian Universalist. I know a lot of the UUs, and they. One of my best friends is a UU, and he taught me this song that's based upon a Rumi quote called "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come." So I guess I can sing that one. I think that might be nice because it's again that invitation.
I like that.
So it goes like this.
I've danced to that often in retreats.
Yeah, it's a good one. Actually, that's a fun. Actually, I think I've never heard anybody seen anybody dance to it. That's a cool idea.
It's a nice circle dance.
Yeah.
Ellen Kennedy.
So it goes.
Leads.
Oh yeah, Ellen did that. Yeah. Okay, so the song goes like this. It goes, "Come, come, whoever you are, wander, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet and come. Come, come, whoever you are, wander, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come."
Amen. Thank you.